Hello, my name is Mike Gralia. I am the founder and managing director of the Syngap Research Fund, a rare disease group that I created for my son who suffers from a rare neurological disease called SYNGAP1. I'm excited to be with you today and to moderate this incredible panel because I know this is a topic that is very important. I get phone calls often from other people creating rare disease groups struggling with this precise issue. So this is a timely and relevant panel that I'm excited to have recorded because I will be referring many people to hear these incredible experts. Let me introduce them to you now. Devin McGraw, JD, LLM, MPH, it's 3 graduate degrees, is the co-founder of Citizen, which was acquired by Invitae last year, and she is now the lead of data stewardship and data sharing for the Citizen platform at Invitae. Previously, Devin directed the U.S. Health Privacy and Security Department as the Deputy Director, Health Information Privacy at HHS Office for Civil Rights. She was the Acting Chief Privacy Officer in the Office of National Coordinator for Health IT. Devin is widely recognized for her expertise in health privacy. She directed the Health Privacy Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology for 6 years, led the Privacy and Security Policy for the High Tech Committee. She was also the Chief Operating Officer at the National Partnership for Women and Families. She advised health industry clients on HIPAA compliance and data governance while a partner at Mannett, Phelps & Phillips. Devin graduated magna cum laude from Georgetown and has her MPH from JHU. Thank you so much for being with us, Devin. Charlene Son-Rigsby, MBA, is the Chief Executive Officer of RareX. She has spent her career building organizations at the intersection of data, technology, and life sciences. Charlene was previously Chief Business Officer at Fabric Genomics and held executive roles as enterprise software and genomics companies, including Oracle and DoubleTwist. She started her career in neuroscience research at Roche. When Charlene's daughter was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease, she co-founded the STX-BP1 Foundation. She is committed to finding a cure for her daughter's disorder. Charlene's unplanned connection between her personal life and profession has helped push forward the search for a cure for her daughter and kids like her, and given her work deeper meaning. She holds an MBA in human biology from Stanford and a BA in human biology from Stanford and an MBA from the Haas School at Berkeley. Rounding out this star-studded panel, Jacob Donahue, MD, PhD, is the CEO and co-founder of Beacon Biosignals, a company that translates scientific innovation into clinical interventions. He completed his MD from Harvard Medical School and his PhD in neuroscience from MIT, leading research into the effects of neuroactive compounds on brain network activity. His published work span epilepsy, cognition, and machine learning methods for quantifying pharmacological effects on neural activity. So I think step one is to hear from these speakers. They all spend their time running remarkable organizations. And Devin, if I could start with you, could you please describe what your company, the company you now work with, now you're part of Invitae, but the company you helped create, Citizen, could you describe how it relates to this issue of data sharing, for rare disease research?
No, sure. Happy to, Mike. Thanks for having me. So Citizen is a platform that helps patients or family members acting on their behalf to gather all their health information, all of it, from all the places where they've been seen, and to put it under their control. We were founded by Anil Sethi, who lost his little sister to metastatic breast cancer. And so we started in cancer, but we added rare neurological diseases in part through the advocacy of one of our key staff members who has a child with FOXG1 syndrome. So we've been in the rare neurological disease space almost since our inception. And really, you know, the idea here is to put the power of data back into the hands of the people who are most likely to use it, and to use it for good. And that's, again, the patients and family members acting on their behalf. It's kind of exciting. We were, you know, being acquired by Invitae brings us into an organization that's like-minded with respect to being dedicated to healthcare. They're a genetic testing company for folks who don't know them. And so it's really, I hope, will give us a lot more resources to scale versus, you know, trying to do all of this as a small company. But again, we really think that the answer to some of these data obstacles is put the data in the hands of patients and their families, and see what happens.
Great. Thank you for that. Charlene, can you tell us about RareX?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So RareX is a health tech nonprofit, and we're also a patient advocacy organization. We really started with the perspective of what do patients need to accelerate therapies. And so patients really are at the center of how we've really developed our strategy and our approach. And so what are we doing? We've developed a platform to gather, structure, and share patient level data to support the acceleration of research and therapy development for rare disease patients. And this is really across the thousands of rare diseases and the growing number of rare diseases. And I kind of specific to this discussion, I wanted to highlight that a core principle of our approach is eliminating data silos. So this includes upfront with our innovative consent process, and also through enabling integration and federation with other data sources.
Very nice. You packed a lot in there. I'm looking forward to unpacking that as we go through this. Jake, can you tell us about Beacon Biosignals?
Sure, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so Beacon Biosignals is a company building a machine learning platform for interrogating brain data at scale and to enable the development of novel precision medicines for neurologic and psychiatric disease. Really, the inspiration for this this work is seeing the sort of developments that were occurring in companies working in digital pathology and thinking about how novel precision measurements can enable precision therapies, especially in oncology, and seeing firsthand taking care of patients, just the limitations in the way that data is collected and the inability to interpret the full depth and breadth of brain data, in this case EEG, that there was an enormous opportunity to bring modern machine learning tools to understand this critical data modality to enable these types of therapies to be driven forward for patients with neurologic, psychiatric, and sleep disorders.
Nice. I remember when I started Syngap Research Fund, somebody told me, if you want to know what's happening in what's going to happen in rare neuroscience tomorrow, look at what's happening in cancer today, because cancer is so much bigger and so much better funded. And it's exactly what you just said. And I think, as Devin alluded to, Citizen was started for cancer, and then thank goodness they rolled into neurology. So it's interesting to see that you're validating that. All right, so let's jump into our first question. I think before we talk about breaking down the barriers, it would be useful to name them, right? So what do you see as the key barriers to rare disease research, and why is it necessary to remove them? Jake, let's stay with you for a second. Can you just you started to answer that already. So can you just talk a little bit about the barriers that you see and
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk more about Beacon or just the barriers from your perspective.
In general, I think so. The key for us, we're a data-driven company applying tools to better understand EEG, brain data about the patients with rare diseases, rare genetic neurologic diseases for Beacon in particular. The key to allowing these tools to be useful and provide actionable information is you actually have to have at least a reasonable amount of data. And in rare disease, where the number of EEG data may be hard to obtain for a number of reasons, that limitation makes it really hard to actually identify patterns that could be critically useful to understanding which patients are going to benefit the most. And then in early studies, in phase 1 trials, if a new treatment is actually having an effect. So that limitation in the inability to acquire the data, both at the site, the hospital settings or in community hospitals where there's a limitation of EEG hardware, and the fact that EEG data is often not part of the standard data types that can be requested from the hospitals. If a patient asks for their EEG data, they often will be given a report of what was read on that data. So all of that really important information about that child or that patient is really buried not only within the data but within this hospital system. So I think that without access to these individual files, no one is able to really interrogate sometimes the most important defining characteristics of disease.
Got it. So low N, and then certain data types, specifically EEG for neurology, incredibly hard to move around. Charlene, let me move to you. What do you see as the barriers to rare disease research?
Yeah, I think I can just really build on what Jacob and you just described. So, giving a little bit of my personal perspective, I also have a child, as Mike mentioned in my intro, who has a rare neurodevelopmental disorder, and she's 8, and she was diagnosed in 2016, so almost 6 years ago, and we still have a long way to go before we get to a cure, or even precision therapies with any wide access. And there's such painful urgency, as parents and as advocates to get to something that's truly going to change the future for our kids. And yet getting to this data that's going to inform these therapies is difficult. So, Mike, you said small n. I mean, the n is small for any individual disorder, and it's even very, very small for certain disorders. And patients in these small, in rare disease, often have difficulty getting researchers interested in putting together a study to actually understand that disease. And when they are successful, those studies are, they can find challenges in providing input into the study and then getting access to the data on the back end. And as Jacob mentioned, oftentimes, healthcare systems and studies, they're really generating silos of data, and it's very difficult to bring those data sets together. And I think this is, true broadly. And, the EEG example is, just a sore example of how, this ends up becoming, kind of a magnified problem. And, I think that this is due to a host of issues, including data governance and misalignment of incentives. And it's very frustrating because, especially in rare disease, when we have this challenge of small numbers of patients, we really need to maximize the utility of the data that we've gathered from these patient populations. And, it's really data that these patients have contributed, to hopefully accelerate the process toward therapies. I really feel that this is a moral imperative.
You pack so much into your answers. So there's data governance issues, there are data silos, and then misaligned incentives. And I just want to make sure I heard this correctly, between researchers who are maybe doing it early on and industry who need to use that data sometimes to actually get a real therapy through trials, right? Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that right?
Yeah, yes, I think that's right. And then, I'll add in also the patients, where, it really needs to be, having the patients around the table as true research partners. And, that's, unfortunately not the norm today.
Right, which is a great setup for Devin. But I also want to underscore one other thing you said, which was moral imperative. So this isn't an academic exercise, right? There are sick children, and what stands between these sick children and therapies that exist in labs right now is the data, and the data being used and shared between the players to make that happen. So I love, I'm going to use that term liberally and occasionally give you credit. We have a moral imperative to do this work. Devin, what do you see as the barriers to rare disease research?
Well, I agree with my co-panelists. To me, I think there's two that sort of rise to the top. One would be proprietary business interests, right? Or sort of lack of motivation to share or motivation not to share, right? If data is considered to be a competitive asset, then you don't want to share it with anybody. Similarly, the data governance rules are truly a challenge, and that challenge gets particularly acute for rare because of the need to gather data across many jurisdictions in order to have a meaningful data set. If you're just dealing with U.S. patients and using the HIPAA right of access, for example, you're likely to not have a sufficient amount of data to power studies. You need to be able to get data from patients who live in other countries. And that means that, they've got their, data governance laws, there are privacy laws, there are research laws that apply when you're collecting data from patients overseas. So that does get challenging. And I think that challenge becomes particularly acute in rare. It's interesting. I don't think about removing these obstacles because some of them you're not going to remove, right? You're not going to, sort of not have competitive instincts of companies, of researchers. You're not going to not have data governance laws that are going to vary. I consider it as doing an end run around them. Like what are some of the holes and the crevices that you can kind of crawl through and figure this out? And for us, with the Citizen platform, it's about, every privacy law gives patients the right to a copy of their data. And every privacy law allows patients and or families acting on their behalf to direct that data to where it needs to go. And when you pull on that thread, you've got the possibility, I think, of creating moving with some more urgency rather than waiting for the wheels to turn very slowly in all of these traditional models and hoping that somebody agrees with you that it's a moral imperative for us to act fast.
Yes, 1,000 times yes. So it's great. So proprietary business interests are a reality. And we need to find, that's probably a whole other discussion, how to navigate that. And then the different jurisdictions, I take your point. I mean, the group I lead, Syngap Research Fund, does work with Citizen. I'm very proud of that and consider myself very lucky and have lived through exactly what you've said, right? We've enrolled more than half of our US population, but getting people from certain other countries is tricky. And that's difficult. Devin, in your introduction, which was so dense, I might have mangled parts of it, but can you just talk a little bit about HIPAA and patient right of access? Because I do think that is at the heart of some of the genius of what you do at Citizen. And as you just alluded to, one of the ways that we're going to do an end run around some of these challenges.
Yeah, so under HIPAA, which is the HIPAA regulations are privacy laws that apply to most of the significant holders of clinical data, clinical and claims data, healthcare facilities, doctors, hospitals, labs, and also to the companies that work with them, health plans as well. There's no mandate to share data under HIPAA except for two. One is with the government when you're being investigated. We use that a lot when I worked for the government. But the most important one for this conversation is the right of the patient to have access to all of the data that is generated about them. And in the case of children, that right belongs to a parent to be able to collect all of the data. And it's so much broader than people realize. It's all data in medical records and any data that exists in another system that's used to make decisions about individuals. So Jake mentioned the difficulty of getting EEG tracings. They're part of the designated record set, which is what patients have a right to access. The problem is that a lot of times organizations didn't realize that was part of their right of access, or they tried to discourage patients by saying, we don't have a way to get these to you. These files are really large. So you have to be able to kind of break through some of that kludginess. And I'm convinced that this is probably why I got hired to help start Citizen in the first place, is because I did have the advantage of knowing those regs like the back of my hand, having worked in that organization and being able to say to healthcare systems that turned us down or made things hard for us to get records for our users, nope, that's not, you can't do that. And here's the piece of guidance that says that you can't. And, slowly but surely kind of amassing a track record of being able to cut through some of that noise. We have not been, we don't have that kind of machinery set up to do that in other countries yet. And so there's a little too much dependency for us on patients sourcing their own records, but we do hope that will change. Because again, the law is on the patient side here. But it still doesn't mean you still don't have to take a pickaxe to some of that, some of that rock that stands in your way, it's unfortunate. But
which you
okay.
have done, and if we have time, we might come back to the ways in which you have thrown a pickaxe at some problems, and I think made the whole U.S. healthcare system better for it. But I want to. So we've shifted from defining the barriers to talking about how important they are. Charlene said moral imperative. Devin reminded us that it's the patients have right to this data. And what I really like that you said, Devin, that I want to underline is, doesn't matter which legal system you're in, most of these rules and regs do have that premise. The patient has an access to their data. And those first principles are great for people like me who aren't lawyers. And when someone's like, well, in Germany, blah, 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 or where in pick a country, blah, 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 I can just be like, look, do they or do they not have a right to their own data? And if the answer is yes, then let's figure out how to execute that. I think that's an important point. But then before we go to that next slide, I just want to come back to Jake and talk about one of the reasons I invited you here, Jake, is because what your company is doing is, I think, making possible through technology the creation of something that is critical, which is endpoints out of data, right? And I think, but you can't do that if you can't get your hands on the data. So can you just double click on like why this is so important that we figure out a way? I think Devin's pickaxe is a beautiful answer, right? So here's Jake with Beacon Biosignals. Here's a bunch of parents who have kids who've had countless EEGs. And to be clear, just to editorialize for a hot minute, getting a kid with a rare neurological disease, an EEG, is a non-trivial experience. You go to the hospital, you put them in front of screens, clinicians come in, things are taped to their heads, bandages are put on their heads. They either wear a backpack or you're walking around with a video camera. And then for 4, 6, 8, 28, 48, 72 hours, this poor child has stuff stuck to their head while this precious data is gathered. Blood, sweat, and tears all happen in this process. Blood, hopefully not, but occasionally. And then it sits on a shelf in a computer. And then Jake meets family and says, I want to make endpoints for your disease in partnership with Pick a Company. And they're like, how do I get the EEG tracings and what? So I don't want to talk for you, Jake, but can you just double click on like the speed that's possible if we could just connect the data with you?
Yeah, and it's like you mentioned, and they will see a lot firsthand. Getting this is an unbelievable burden on patients and their families, and that when in these clinical settings you're able to get all this data, what a shame that it's only one interpretation by one clinician, and then that data is buried within these silos and makes it not accessible for the types of work that we're doing. So to go into what you were saying, basically what we think is that we need more rigorous quantitative precision measurements for these new next generation precision therapies. And so for us in our data modality, looking at brain activity is a great way of understanding how a novel treatment is affecting the brain. So currently, we don't really have the tools to efficiently do this. And so oftentimes we use surrogates in clinical trials, like the seizure diary, where parents are given this additional burden to have to count what they see by eye as clinical events, which of course is an extremely meaningful endpoint for the patient and the parents. But that's something that, again, is not an equitable endpoint. A lot of times parents aren't able to always be at home watching their parents or watching their children. And then it, of course, is not capturing the subclinical activity in the brain. There's a lot going on that isn't seen by an observer, whether that's a parent or an epileptologist. You can't just look at the patient. And so for us, we think that there's a really interesting opportunity to at least supplement these endpoints so that you have more shots on goal when you create a new precision therapy to see, oh no, even at this early stage trial, in the small n, we can see that this new treatment is actually affecting brain activity, something like the epileptiform spikes or seizures, these quantitative, pathologic events. We can now rapidly capture these automatically, more reliably than any epileptologist with our tools. And we can do this almost instantaneously when we have the data. And so this is the type of possibilities that we open up when you have quantitative tools that have been validated to actually interrogate this data. So more shots on goal, more, if you can get it, more shots on goal for treatments to hopefully advance to the next phase.
Yeah. Amazing.
I just want to jump in, and Jacob, I think this is so important because, at the end of the day, why are we trying to put together all this data? It's so that we can get therapies and cures for our kids. And, the point that you're making around, EEGs and endpoints really hits home for me. So my daughter has a rare neurodevelopmental disorder, and for this, I guess, class of disorders, seizures, counting seizures is typically, the primary endpoint. And this is really problematic for, the broader set of neurodevelopmental disorders where, a lot of kids, for instance, in STXBP1 have variable seizure profiles over their lifetime. And, in the case of my daughter, she doesn't have seizures, but she has, a spectrum of other, symptoms. And so being able to, equip ourselves with, the data that has been generated. I was laughing when Mike was talking about the EEGs because I barely survived my daughter's last 24-hour EEG. But, we've never seen that data. And so being able to mine that, so that we can have endpoints that can be successful across our spectrum of patients is so critical for us to be able to achieve getting these therapies to them.
Yep. Okay, I want to, you all lead very innovative organizations. Devin with Citizen, Jake with Beacon, Charlene with RareX, actually, and STXBP1. I would dare say STXBP1 is a leader in the rare disease space, someone I copy as often as I can. And when you're dealing at the cutting edge and you're innovating like this, it's easy to forget what would happen if you didn't exist, right? If people weren't working on these cutting edge scenarios, what would happen? So I think, can we just take a second and paint a picture of what patients, researchers, and companies would do if your organization and the peer group, right? If these solutions that we're talking about that address these barriers didn't exist, let's just quickly go around and remind people what we'd be up against. So Devin, what did it look like before Citizen and its ilk?
Well, I mean, I can't imagine where we would be without the sort of the organizations that you all started, because honestly, you are the ones who sort of pushed us. It was really family members. We were founded by a family of someone who died too young of a disease that should have been caught earlier. And, my colleague Nasha Fitter from Fox G1, similarly, like, you all push us to do the things, to sort of put the ideas we have in our head and direct them into the right space. So I will say that I feel like maybe one of the biggest value adds that we put into this mix is the data gathering, is you should not have to depend on, you shouldn't have to do this yourself. You shouldn't have to depend on a research company doing it for you, because it's actually so hard to do that maybe some of them would only be interested in studying your disease if you came to them with the data already. Or let's say you had a partnership with someone who gathered a bunch of data and then they changed their minds or they lost their funding. And rather than giving you back the data that you helped them gather or that was about you, no, it just disappeared. It went on a shelf or it never got extracted in the first place. And then, of course, there's the issue of, once you get reams and reams of data, how do you make sense of that data, right? And it's another piece of innovation that layers on top of all of this. But I sort of feel like it's really the groups, the patient advocacy organizations, many of them led by parents, that kind of push the folks who think they've got a big idea or a good idea into sort of pursuing something that's actually going to be meaningful for people.
Yep. And so without Citizen, then you just to push on it a tiny bit, you're like, what would happen? It would be basically researchers reaching out to parents reaching out to the clinicians, sending the files to the researcher who hopefully has time and money to get through them and may or may not choose to share them. I mean, I will tell you, being in Citizen, there's one researcher a number of our families have gone to, and he promptly takes lots of tests and readings, makes you sign a consent. You're there with a doctor. You're trying to help your kid. You sign the consent. All these tests, they go on a shelf. Fast forward 2 years, I go to Citizen. Citizen collects my son's data for him, and I say, hey, what about all those EEGs and the this and the that? And he's like, oh, no, that was research. That's different. I don't have to share that because that was for a research study. And it just kills me. I'm like, I flew my son 2 time zones and subjected him to this, and you won't even share the data? But with Citizen, we get all the other testing that Tony's had over his life, and we're able to share it again and again with researchers, and companies can license it.
Yeah, that's right. Without having this sort of silo that we spoke to before. And it's really the data access issue that Jake brought up right from the get-go, as did Charlene, right? If you can't access this data, you are nowhere. And yet it's getting generated every day, either in clinical encounters or in things that parents and family members see and caring for someone at home.
Right. And then Jake, without Beacon Biosignals and actually being able to look at the tracings, can you just take us back into a hospital 10, 15, 20 years ago? Like, kid has EEG. What happens to that EEG? How is that those hours and hours of, God knows how many electrode data points processed and shared?
Well, I don't think we even need to go back 15 or 20 years. Again, what I had witnessed, recently. Right now, when we actually are able to get an EEG in a clinical setting, sometimes it can be a long EEG. There is, an epileptologist, so somebody that's gone through medical school, neurology residency training, then specialization, fellowship in epilepsy, that has to sit and read this entire EEG recording, often with a long backlog on a given day, and really has a hard time when being able to actually review an entire, say, 72-hour EEG. So you can never actually look at all the data in all the different ways that you might want to, let's say, if it were much shorter. So you're limited by a human having to go through these very long records. Second, there is, profound evidence showing the amount of inter-rater disagreement on epileptologists. So that, to be specific, you see a given event, and one epileptologist may say this is normal, and another one may say that this is abnormal. In fact, there's evidence that if you show the same data to the same epileptologist, either later in time, they may disagree with themselves. And so before, Beacon, you really have to rely on sort of reports of what a single epileptologist might review for a given file. Some of our biopharma partners before Beacon would have to ask, an epileptologist just to look at 5 minutes of the 60 minutes of data. We know it's too much data for you to look at. So just look at this small subset, even though we know this is not capturing the full breadth of the data and the disease. So, we just unlock this opportunity to be able to actually assess all of the data and quantitatively. And you can do it today, tomorrow, and 2 years from now, it's going to give you the exact same result. And I think that's how you build quantitative endpoints that actually move the needle.
Right. If you can get the data. And then, Charlene, without RareX, can you just elaborate on the data silos and what it would take without RareX and the ability to do what you're doing?
Yeah, maybe I can start by talking about, what were the critical challenges that we saw in terms of, trying to address with RareX. And, clearly data silos, we've been talking about that a lot. And, related to data, lack of usable data, lack of data, and patient empowerment challenges. And so moving to lack of usable data, what we've seen is that studies might not include key data that's actually the key data to drive drug development forward. And information might not be collected. Information might not be collected using data standards. And so this complicates downstream analysis. In rare disease, we also have this big challenge that data often doesn't exist. So if you're a new or emerging community, you need to start collecting data. And how do you start collecting it if you don't have any baseline data? So what do you measure, and what do you collect? And then finally, I really love that we've been talking about patients so much during this panel, because I feel that one of the most important challenges that RareX was started to address was that patients aren't empowered to make decisions on the data they're contributing. And so then maybe I can flip and answer your kind of question, which is, what's a world without RareX and our like-minded contemporaries? Well, first, the traditional consent, where participants are consenting for data and it's limited to the current study and there isn't any downstream use. I mean, you just talked about that with the with your example of Tony going to a researcher. And data isn't produced in a way, data would not be produced in a way that it would be openly available for researchers, for all researchers, and also in a research-ready format. Much more limited data would be available for rare disease, especially for emerging and ultra-rare disorders. And finally, patients would have a much more limited role in deciding how their data can be used for research.
Yep, it's all true. I send a newsletter out to my group and I always sign it "Time is Brain," because I want to remind people that we all love someone whose child has a brain that is being built badly right now because of some identified genetic deficiency. And the sooner we get these precision therapies, which Jake mentioned, the sooner we can rectify that. So moving fast and being efficient is so key. Anyone want to say anything before I go to the next question? Okay. So we've talked about what we're doing. We've talked about what the barriers are. We've talked about what the world would look like without us. So hopefully now, with Citizen, we can get the data fast. Hopefully we'll figure out the EEG tracing. Jake can find the endpoints. Charlene and RareX can gather all that data, working with rare disease groups like STXBP1 and Syngap 1. Very exciting. What's around the corner? So as you think about data sharing and you sitting where you sit doing the work you do, I'm curious, when you look around the corner, what you get excited about being possible. Like, it's important to focus on the barriers and break them down, but it's also exciting to assume success and say, okay, what's next? That's where I get going. So Jake, let me start with you. What's possible? Give us some good news.
Yes, I think we have great news. I think that, with groups like that of our panelists, we can do things like shrink the time that we do natural history studies in drug development. Right now, again, for everyone, this is oftentimes we will do a 1 or 2 year long study, either retrospective or identify patients where we need to better understand the disease because it was too hard to obtain the data on these patients in the first place, so that we can now inform our studies when we start giving treatment. With advances in data sharing, we can grab all that data or work with Beacon in our database and identify the biomarkers of interest, in weeks, not years. And so now we've, de-risked components of novel clinical trials so that you can move forward much, much faster. So I think that's what really makes it exciting for us to start. And then we can compare, when we do start a clinical trial, how, these 10 or 12 patients in a phase 1, how do they compare to the patients in this larger group that we've collected across the country or the world, to make sure that this is really representative of the disease that we're trying to study, and that when we make a treatment, it's really going to impact patients all over, and not just these particular individuals.
Very cool. So we can move faster. Time is brain, and I think you can. Yeah, I'm really excited. Here we go. Charlene, what do you get excited about when you look to the future?
I'm excited about what Jacob talked about. I mean, that is, what we really want is shrink that time from years to weeks. And that is tremendously exciting from a rare disease patient perspective. Something else that I think bringing all of this data together and breaking down this silos enables is looking at diseases cross disorder. So, with RareX, that's one of the things that we've really, architected the platform to do, is to gather data in a structured and consistent way across disorders. And so we're really excited about this idea to not only enable analysis within a disorder, but also for disorders where there's shared symptomology or shared pathways to be able to analyze those disorders together and potentially come up with therapeutic strategies that can address a number of disorders instead of just a single one.
Yeah, I've already started to see this with your. I mean, this is STXBP1 and Syngap1 when because we share some data sets. When I see one of which is Citizen, when I see side-by-side analysis of our kids, I actually know, okay, your kids have more motor issues than my kids have more aggression than your kids, GI, et cetera, et cetera. It's utterly fascinating. And if you think about the doctors, like Jake, back when he was in the hospital, they actually have a reference point. If they've seen 5 Syngap kids, but they've never seen an STXer, they could reference this research and get a sense, okay, these are the things I need to look at. It's so exciting. And then Devin, when you look at the, sorry, go ahead, Jake.
I was just going to add one more thing to that, because I think it's such an important point. Not only are the features of disease may be similar, and when you think about, from our perspective and more broadly, what are the new endpoints for trials that really we can build a community across rare disease organizations to say, hey, this quantitative seizure metric or quantitative epileptiform spike burden, this is not just important for this one disease, but we're going to come together as a community that Mike and myself and many others are thinking about really how do we go to the regulators and really move the whole field forward, because this is not something specific to one niche disease. We're seeing this across the spectrum and think that we can move the whole field forward. And that type of amazing work, that RareX and others are doing allows these opportunities that we can do this.
Yes. Because I think, it's important to know, well, there's only a handful of amazing rare disease groups like the one Charlene's leads. There's hundreds of rare diseases and growing. And people are easy, oh, there's 200 patients here, rare disease is so small. It's not. It's a huge cohort of kids who are suffering. And if we can process that data at scale, we can help them all, which is important. It's a moral imperative. But Devin, what do you get excited about as you look to the future?
On the theme of go faster, be more efficient, get there more quickly. This is also more of a US-based advancement, but I'm pretty excited about it. So one of the things that still slows us down at Citizen is that it can take us up to 30 days and potentially sometimes longer to gather all of one of our users' information from all the places where they've been seen. And then we have to have the parent or the patient themselves, if it's an adult, tell us when they've been seen again so that we can go back and collect any new records. So it doesn't look very Silicon Valley, right? There's a lot of sort of manual effort involved. It takes a lot of time. And there are some policy developments in the US that are going to should make it easier for patients to get data in a way that gets them at least a solid set of data quickly within even 24 hours or less. And the amount of data that is sort of going through that very fast pathway is expanding. So the idea of sort of driving this through the patient, I think for a lot of companies, it looked daunting because of the work involved in gathering the data in the first place. And so some of these innovations around getting data quicker, I think are going to be quite groundbreaking. Now in Rare, again, where some of the data that we're trying to get is, for example, EEG tracings and other data that is not going to be on the short list of data that's going to be available quickly, there's still going to be effort involved. But if I can get most of the data that I need for our users in 24 hours, and then I've got to spend, use the time of my people who collect records to chase down the hard stuff, that allows us to scale. That allows us to scale much more quickly. That allows us to put data in the hands of researchers much more quickly, takes some of the burden off of the parents to let us know when their child has been seen again, so we can go back and collect the records. There's some more opportunities for automatic refresh. So I'm actually pretty excited about data access only getting better and quicker from here, at least in the US. And then hopefully the US will serve as an example for where other countries need to go. And I also would say, some of the FDA guidances around how they will consider real world data and real world evidence is pretty critical to the rare disease space. I think the sort of orphan drug and other departments at the FDA that work in rare sort of understand that what they've got is something different and requires more attention to be paid to real world data as opposed to reliant on, you know, the sort of pristine clinical trial data. But that's another sort of development that came out of the 21st Century Cures Act that appears to be making a difference. And is, again, another place where it's quite possible that the US may be ahead of other countries in terms of, you know, leveraging data generated in clinical and home settings to power drug discovery. Mike, I think you're on mute.
Wow, this shouldn't be an hour webinar. This should be like a day-long session. And so there's so much here that you just explained. And I'm just going to kind of try to synthesize how I explain what Citizen does, right? You, the parent, consent. Citizen collects all your records in 30 days. And Devin, you just said that's too long and it's too much work. As a parent, it feels like light speed. And it's great that you guys are doing the work, right? But then after 30 days, that data has to be processed. And then it's made available to researchers and clinicians. And then that's used, my cuckoo clock is going off in the background. And then that's used to create real world evidence, right? It's important to just spell it out for people because people think these terms are interchangeable, right? And I suspect you're being a little modest. I mean, you say maybe the US is ahead. I mean, you basically managed HIPAA for years, right? So you've been in the trenches of this, of how it's working. And it's important to remind people that there's that pathway. And what I heard you say was that collection effort that took 30 days, now that we figured it out, we're learning how to use robots to do it. And there's a regulatory environment that permits that, right? So we got the rules in place and the robots in place to make that happen. And then you layer on RareX, which would allow these different data things to connect. And then hopefully, now the trouble is those pipes are built for medical records. And then one of the obvious why I invited Jake to be here, but one of the troubles is that EEGs don't flow neatly through those pipes, right? That's a big, ugly data set that lives in different computers, and we need to think about that. And I will throw in that, you know, whole exome and whole genome sequencing also does not fit neatly through those pipes, right? People get whole exome sequencing, this massive amount of data, and they get told you have one SNP, and this is your cause of disease. But the truth is, as compute and research evolves to the point where we could actually process that data, we're going to have the same problem. How do we get these massive files that are different based on the version and the company and the hardware? There's so many reasons they're different, aren't interoperable. And how do we get them to the place where they can be used to facilitate precision therapies? It's really exciting and important. And I'm so glad that we have had this time. All right, I need to take questions or I'll get in trouble. I don't want to get in trouble. So let's take questions from the audience. But before I do, Charlene, Jake, Devin, any thoughts you want to make before we open it up? Because the questions could take us in new directions. Charlene, last thought, or go to questions?
I just wanted to bring something up that we touched on earlier, but didn't really kind of talk much about, which is alignment of incentives in research. And I think that this is really important because it's an issue that we still have to tackle. And obviously, as discussed on today's panel, there's a lot of work that's happened in terms of changing many aspects and many processes around access to data and utilizing it for research. But research incentives are still a huge challenge. In academia, publish or perish is still kind of the dominant approach. And so researchers, I don't think that many intend to or would even think that they're hoarding data, but because they need to write their paper before allowing others to access the data, that becomes a challenge because that delays access, to the data. And then the other thing on the commercial side with pharma is that I think that pharma are starting to understand that having natural history data is not a competitive advantage unto itself. Like pharma is going to differentiate and win based on their technology and their ability to move their pipeline forward. But we need a way to transform, the current way that research is being done and initiated and make it easy for pharma to collaborate in a pre-competitive way on shared data sets. And I'll just say that I think that public-private partnerships are a way to establish and scale this model.
Very nice. Jake, closing thought before I go to questions? Muted. I think you're muted, Jake.
I was just going to sort of double click on that, because I think that was even more eloquently stated than I would have. So I think those are the next steps that hopefully will enable the future that we all want quickly. Pre-competitive
natural history studies and addressing the conflicts, the inherent conflicts of interest in the way academia is structured, and the sense of urgency.
For the specifics on the academia side, one of the things that we're trying to do is, again, for us, we're not motivated by publications only. As we're trying to accelerate novel therapies, so we are experimenting. What happens if we give our tools, for free to some of these academic groups that give them superpowers to be able to analyze their data using some of Beacon's tools, and now they can publish papers on, which is their currency for advancing their careers. But now we can use some of this data to better understand the disease and build better biomarkers. But yeah, like you guys, like we've talked about, this requires creativity to be able to, work within the existing structures as opposed to thinking about how to break them down.
Yeah. Last thought, Devin?
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I feel like we've surfaced a lot of really good stuff on this call, and I'm excited to work with everyone on this, because we're, again, we just want to give you the data that'll power what you need. So that's our kind of niche role in this whole equation. So
I would love you to automate EEG
better.
collection. Yes, that would.
I would love that too.
That would be amazing. All right, I got to take some questions. Good. So a few questions have rolled in. I will, if you're looking at the chat, I'll start with number one, and I'll work my way up some at the bottom. What strategies are used to address European privacy changes in view of COVID impact? I mean, I could have stopped at European privacy challenges before I even said COVID, but let's make that two questions. Any thoughts on European data regs and sort of a European approach to data privacy versus what we've really focused on here, which is the US one? And then, has COVID had an impact on data sharing and collaboration? Anyone?
Well, so I can take a stab at the first stab at a couple of both of those, actually. So, again, everyone sort of looks at GDPR, European privacy regimes, as, they are more stringent than what's going on in the US. And again, the fact of the matter is that they have patient consent plays a very strong role in provisioning access to data. And patients have strong rights in their data, including the right to get a copy of it. So in many respects, the GDPR so-called obstacles actually play very well in sort of patient and family-driven models of data gathering and collection. I just think it's been underutilized as a tool over there because it's less familiar than maybe it is over here. And then in terms of COVID-19, I mean, we did see an amazing dedication of resources across the globally, really, toward fighting the pandemic. It's like, we all had a common foe all of a sudden, and some of the silos around data sharing melted away. I mean, it's not like we didn't struggle to gather data, especially even here in the US. In a timely way, but I saw lots and lots of collaborations, scientific collaborations, for-profit organizations creating databases that they basically, the data brokers saying, we're opening up our data for free for COVID researchers to come and take a look at it and to do studies on it and at no charge. And that kind of all hands on deck approach is absolutely amazing. And it does make you wonder why we can't deploy that more toward, diseases that are not epidemic or pandemic, but are, really ones that we're still struggling with, and that for the families involved are as bad, if not worse, than what we've been going through with COVID.
Jake, Charlene, thoughts on Europe or COVID?
I mean, I'll just say that we have to be able to be global because rare disease patients are all over the world. And so this is a critical thing for us to figure out in terms of being able to really bring together these cohorts of patients across country borders.
Yep. Okay, keep going. I mean, I will only say that in addition to the regulatory environment, which Devin has pointed out is maybe more the same than different, there is the cultural approach, right? I have talked people, a lot of nationalities, into signing up for Citizen, and there's a different conversation around privacy with different nationalities, and that can't be missed.
Yeah.
We had a question.
Sure.
What is your experience? Sorry.
I said for sure.
Yeah.
And having our platform available in different languages would sure help too.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
Hopefully with translation, it's all software. What is your experience collaborating with patient advocacy groups? So I quickly go through that because I think we've talked a little bit about it, but Charlene, do you work with patient advocacy groups?
Yeah, in fact, we onboard disease communities by collaborating with patient advocacy groups. And so we feel that that's really important because, at the end of the day, the trust is within the community. And, so we want to work with that group to enable that group to be successful with, onboarding and initiating data collection.
So if somebody wants to work with you, they should just call you up.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Devin, same question.
Yeah, I was going to say ditto. We wouldn't be where we are without patient advocacy groups. We depend on them to help us recruit people to the platform. We probably wouldn't really have a way to function without an advocacy group at the other end. As a startup for so long, we only got acquired towards the end of last year. Like we were limited by our bandwidth in terms of the number of advocacy groups that we would support. But again, on the horizon, see us being able to scale more quickly to more groups and more diseases in the very near future with the additional resources of a larger company, plus the ability to sort of combine the genetic and phenotypic data from Invitae.
Can't wait. Okay.
Yeah, we're as a very, very early stage startup. We're just sort of getting started ourselves. We've obviously getting our conversations with Mike, and we've had groups approach ours, which we want to support going forward. We definitely, in the indications where we're going after first, I think the patient advocacy groups and Beacon are 100% aligned, and we want to understand the data as quickly as possible. And often going through the academic medical centers and otherwise can be very difficult and encumbering. So, with Mike and Syngap One, for example, we're talking about how to think about getting large amounts of data so that we can do these types of studies really quickly and bring that information to the world to be able to have actionable insights. So I think that for us over the next few years, I can imagine we'll have very strong relationships as we grow our company and support our capabilities to go after a number of these rare neurologic disorders.
Okay, 1.5 more questions, because I think the last one I'm just going to try to take. What degree of this one's interesting. What degree of clinical lab data and EHR standardization is required, or necessary, I guess, to understand strength of evidence for regulatory decision support? Does everything have to be standardized, or we can't use it, or not? Charlene, Devin.
Well, maybe I can take a first stab at this. So, we feel that data standardization is really important. So mapping, data to, standards, whether they be HPO or HL7. And, I know that Citizen also, does a similar thing. And there is FDA guidance, for that's I think it's draft guidance that's come out on real world data of the necessity of mapping to standards. And so this is a really important aspect of building a data set that can be used, for, both generating evidence and then, also moving forward to support regulatory decision support.
Yeah, when the data are already standardized in the electronic record and coming from the labs, it makes our job so much easier. But we've certainly found that there's just a motherlode of data in non-standard, non-structured formats. A lot of it in clinical notes, for example. Progress notes are almost like the gold mine for understanding what's happening with a patient, in addition, of course, to labs in the case of neurological diseases, EEG tracings. All of that stuff complete the whole picture. You've got to have the ability to sort of take the non-structured data and standardize it, if there are standards available. And again, that's something that we have really worked on since the very beginning and continue to improve our capacity to do that. So now, in terms of sort of how the FDA feels about non-structured data, I think if they can understand the origin of the data, feel comfortable in the provenance of the data points that are coming before them, and have a decent enough size data set. That's supposed to be the whole point of gathering real world data that turns into real world evidence that supports clinical and regulatory and research decision making. So the FDA is just, at least in the US, is again just starting to, I think, place more reliance on real world evidence versus requiring this sort of pristine standardized collection as part of, like, through a clinical trial. And so I think the next couple of years will be very telling in terms of just how willing the regulatory agency is in accepting some of this data that comes out of non-traditional sources.
Jake, any thoughts on this question about standardization?
Citizen, for example, does an amazing job being able to organize, even though this sort of additional clinical real world data may come in different formats, being able to think about what is common across these different data types so that you can then build models to better understand what is being seen in the real world. Of course, that type of control isn't always there, but that as supporting evidence as you're building out, these natural history studies, for example, can be critically valuable to making, decisions about go, no go to make this new therapy.
Yeah. So the last question is, and then I'll give it back because I realize we're at time. What is the best platform / database if you're starting from scratch? So if you're a brand new rare disease group, whatever. I'm going to editorialize here. My answer is on the screen, right? Call Citizen, get on the list. Call Charlene, sign up for RareX. Call Jake, get on his dance card. Like, if you're starting from scratch, when I was asked to host this, I called the 3 best people I knew, and they're on the screen right now. But until you get on their dance cards, my advice to every rare disease group is make sure you know your patients. Do not delegate this to a well-meaning researcher with a little bit of funding, because they're going to fund a natural history study for 2 years and then going to go to another institution, and you will be precluded from seeing that data by some IRB that is attempting to protect the patients. Makes me bananas. So my answer is get to know your community, keep a contact list, and find professional partners, because as you saw today, this is highly complicated and you need people who really think about it all day long. That's my thought. Would anyone amend that before I hand it back to Tom?
No, I totally agree. Build your community first. Spend your time getting to know your people, because it's a dependency that can't be skipped over. So,
well said.
Here. And
with that, before I give it to you, Tom, I just want to say thank you to the panelists and thank you to Biosignal for inviting me to do this. This is a talk I'm going to forward to a lot of people and strongly urge them to listen to. Over to you, Tom.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mike. And thanks to you all for sharing these great insights and being really generous with your time today. On behalf of Biosignal and Marcus Evans webinars, we'd just like to thank you all for joining us and do hope you'll be listening in at our next event. Take care and have a good rest of your day.